Your request for a dossier on a prominent gatorman leader is one I would ordinarily refuse. As you can imagine, it is quite difficult to track down reliable documents concerning a race without a written language that also shuns human contact. That said, you have chosen the single gatorman, likely in all of Western Immoren, with enough influence in history to be a reasonable subject for my services. You will, of course, understand the 20% increase in my normal fee. The cost of replacing garments lost to mud alone demands more robust compensation. Bloody Barnabas is without a doubt the most influential gatorman in Western Immoren now, and perhaps in the entirety of history. I understand that is a bold statement, but as you read the facts, myths, and legends concerning the ancient gatorman shaman, I believe you will come to agree with my assessment. The strength and magical prowess attributed to Bloody Barnabas borders on the absurd, and truly he is seen as something far more than a mortal by the gatormen under his command. Myths and legends are often rooted in fact, and it may be that Barnabas has accomplished what no gatorman before him has ever attempted. He has united large numbers of intensely independent and tribal-minded creatures beneath a single banner. To truly understand Barnabas, we must delve into his past, a past that is reported to stretch back some 300 years. Here we may find answers to two very important questions. First, are the legends and myths concerning Barnabas's power based in fact, or are they simply the primitive ramblings of a primitive people? Second, what are Barnabas's true goals, and do they represent a credible and imminent threat to mankind? Summary. Do note that the first four dates are approximate, and the events detailed are attributed to Bloody Barnabas on the dubious theory that he is hundreds of years old. Thus, the veracity of this information should be considered suspect. 300 AR. Estimated date of Barnabas's hatching. Unverifiable. 350. Barnabas established himself as powerful local warlord and shaman near Blindwater Lake. Leads many successful raids on nearby human villages. 400. Begins to conquer other tribes of gatormen, uniting them all under his rule. Those that refuse to join him are destroyed. Influence extends to the Bloodsmith. 500. Iconography depicting Barnabas as a deity begins to appear in the Bloodsmith, and as far away as the Fen Marsh. 541. Barnabas leads an attack on a Signaran supply train near Blindwater Lake, destroying a significant military force. 570. Barnabas is the undisputed master of the gatormen of the Eastern Thornwood. At this time, he may have begun to subjugate other swamp-dwelling races, namely the fish-like bog trogs. 606. Barnabas strengthens his hold on the Fen Marsh by allying with the powerful shaman Caliban, also known as the Grave Walker. 608. Barnabas and Caliban attack the river steamer Alton Air, slaughters its passengers, and uses the energy derived from their depths to summon an ancient and powerful swamp spirit. Before I apply you with documents dredged up from the depths of history, I feel it necessary to set the stage for a more scientific approach. Bloody Barnabas is said to be many hundreds of years old, and although I find the idea of a 300-year-old gatorman dubious in the extreme, there is some evidence to suggest that gatormen are abnormally resistant to the effects of advanced age. The following document is an excerpt from a treatise penned by the late Professor Connolly Bray, who disappeared in the Fen Marshes while researching his chosen subjects. The attached portion deals with one of Professor Bray's more controversial theories called indeterminate lifespan. A theory most commonly held amongst naturalists is that large reptiles display a trait known as indeterminate growth. In layman's terms, this means a reptile will continue to grow throughout its life so long as it has access to a stable and constant food supply. There is no upper limit to such growth so long as the creature lives, has enough room to expand to its size, and has adequate food supply. Gatormen, although certainly reptilian, have not inherited indeterminate growth from their primitive forebears. Instead, they display a trait eminently more fascinating. My research in the Fen Marshes has revealed that gatormen are highly resistant to infirmities of age.
The Stone Scales tribes include members over a century old, and gatormen as old as 2 centuries or more are not completely unheard of. Apparently, if a gatorman does not meet his end through disease, misadventure, or warfare, he can expect to live almost indefinitely. I have dubbed this trait indeterminate lifespan, and I am in the process of gathering more information on the subject, although my colleagues have scoffed at what they wrongly term as gatorman immortality. My initial findings suggest that the upper limits of gatorman longevity may be as high as 300 to 400 years.
As you can imagine, written records about individual gatormen from 300 years ago are exceedingly difficult to find. However, much to my surprise, I was able to track down a few letters and other documents describing a gatorman who could very well be Bloody Barnabas. However, I feel much obligated to warn you that the veracity of these accounts are dubious at best. These accounts could be describing nearly any powerful gatorman shaman. As such, I have chosen to include only those documents I feel are most probably attributed to Bloody Barnabas. The first documents date back to 355, a correspondence between the 8th Earl of Bloodsmith and his huntsman regarding gatorman attacks on local villages bordering on the swamp. The huntsman's descriptions of a powerful gatorman chieftain leading the raids are of particular interest.
It has come to my attention that the villages on the southern edge of the marsh are under attack by marauding bands of gatormen. There have been many petitioners at my gates every day for the past fortnight demanding recompense for destroyed properties and slain loved ones. My patience is growing thin just as my purse is growing lighter, and I find myself asking why my huntsman has not dealt with these savages. I want these creatures eradicated. We must send a strong message that such barbarity will be met with fire and steel. Do I make myself clear, sir? Garrick Blackwater, Earl of Bloodsmith.
My lord, I am quite aware of the gatormen attacks on the southern villages. I am doing what I can to protect the villages. I have dealt with gatorman attacks in the past, but these raids consisted of small hunting parties, no match for the determined force of a mounted and armed troop of men. These recent attacks are something quite different. They are on a much larger scale and show a level of organization I have never seen from gatormen. I believe this is largely due to the presence of a strong chieftain among them. I have yet to encounter this chieftain myself, but the villagers I have questioned are terrified of him. He purportedly wields a large axe and adorns himself with the skulls of his victims. Additionally, more than one account insists that he commands great swamp beasts in addition to dozens of gatormen. My lord, let me be blunt. I am ill-equipped to deal with this situation, and I will not throw away my life in a futile attempt to hunt this gatorman chieftain in the trackless swamps down. You must provide me with more men-at-arms or simply relocate the surviving villages. Seperate Elswick.
The next document dates some 50 years after the correspondence between the Earl of Bloodsmith and his huntsman. This document too concerns the same region, the gatormen within it, and vicious raids carried out by a singularly powerful gatorman leader. However, this account differs from the previous one in that the attacks were not perpetrated on encroaching humans, but on other gatormen. This letter is from an enterprising Corvus merchant to his superiors regarding the end of his trade with a peaceable tribe of gatormen that could signify the beginning of Bloody Barnabas' dominance of the area. Again, the gatorman described here bears some similarities to Barnabas, and he is even identified by name. As telling as this may seem, the current Barnabas may simply have borrowed the name of a powerful forebearer to gain the respect and honor associated with it.
Trademaster Merle, as you know, I have established contact and peaceful negotiations with the tribe of gatormen, the Red Fangs, in the southern Bloodsmith. These gatormen have access to fields of freshwater clams that provide a surprising bounty of pearls. Since gatormen have no use for them, they have been quite eager to trade them for food, weapons and tools, and valuable baubles. I have successfully traded with these gatormen and their chieftain, Hixcor, for the past 2 seasons, and is without a doubt one of the most profitable ventures I have been involved in. Unfortunately, I have grave news.
I recently returned from the Bloodsmith, where I was to meet Hiscore and discuss the terms of this season's trade. When I arrived at the Red Fang village, I found it completely destroyed and the area littered with gatorman corpses. Hiscore was among the dead. Although my grasp of the gatorman tongue is rudimentary, I was able to discern the following details from the few survivors. The attack on the Red Fangs had been carried out by a powerful gatorman shaman, or bokur as they call it, named Barnabas, who was demanded that Hiscore and his tribe unite with his own and accept his rule. When Hiscore refused, Barnabas and an overwhelming force of gatormen attacked, slaying every Red Fang that did not flee to the swamps. Obviously, the lucrative trade we have had with the Red Fangs is over, and I think it is imprudent and dangerous to the extreme to approach this Barnabas with a similar agreement. My hope is that the strife in the Bloodsmith will die down in the next few years, and we can attempt to re-establish trade at that time. Senior Trader Harl Barrett. The next document is considerably more recent than the last two, although still over a century old. This excerpt is taken from an essay written by Teresen Dre, a Immoren priest concerned with the religions of savage people, primarily gatormen and pharaoh. It offers very little information of value and is essentially a long-winded criticism of these quote-unquote backwards people and their quote-unquote false gods. However, it does offer one important fact of note regarding the establishment of what Teresen believes to be an emerging gatorman deity. The gatormen of the Fen Marshes hold the same misguided beliefs that the swamp is alive with spirits that can be harnessed, controlled, and exploited for magical power. The greatest of these spirits is a being known as Kosk, and it is fair to say that this bestial entity is the most important gatorman deity. However, I have recently noted another god appearing just below the image of Kosk upon gatorman totems placed at the very edges of tribal borders. This new deity appears as a stylized gatorman bokur with a shroud-like headdress, adornment of what appears to be human skulls, and with an open maw stained with blood. From what I've been able to gather from the gatorman tribes in the area, this deity is known as Barnabas the Bloody Maw, or simply Bloody Barnabas. Interestingly, totems like the one described above can still be found in both the Bloodsmith and the Fen Marshes. So what do we make of all this? If we abandon the notion that Barnabas is extreme age, then I think it is quite possible that he has simply adopted the guise of a long-dead shaman who amassed great power in his day. This would go a long way to explain how the myths and legends surrounding Barnabas has persisted for so long. Also of note, this excerpt, dated 505, is the first usage of the title Bloody Barnabas. Finally, we make our way from ancient history into the better documented present. Records and accounts beyond this point, I think, can safely be attributed to the true Bloody Barnabas. Still, these swamps of western Immoren are dark and deep, and until recently, Barnabas and his ilk have rarely ventured beyond them. As such, information is scant, and nearly all of what I have been able to gather on Barnabas's recent activities comes second or even third hand. The first document dates from the reign of Ventur III and concerns an attack on a Signaran supply column on the edge of Blindwater Lake. This report, which details an account by the quartermaster who survived the attack, is quite compelling, as it details Bloody Barnabas overcoming a significant modern military force with apparent ease.
Major, I have located the remains of the supply column from Corbus, or at least what's left of it. This took more time than I anticipated, largely because the road along the western edge of the Blindwater, a road we have used for the better part of a century, is simply gone, swallowed completely by marshlands. I only found the remains of the supply column because the hull of a wrecked nomad projected above the water. My men and I searched for survivors for some time, and we found nothing but waterlogged corpses, most in terrible shape, torn to pieces and partially devoured. After hours of searching, we did find one survivor, the quartermaster, Lieutenant Martin Umber. He was trapped beneath the wreck of a Talon, half mad with terror. We hauled him out of the marsh to solid ground, treated his wounds, and got some food into him. I then attempted to coerce a report out of Lieutenant Umber. He said the supply train was attacked by gatormen, which is not uncommon, as you know. However, for gatormen to attack a force as large as the one that led by Lieutenant Umber is unheard of. He told me the gatormen were led by one of their chieftains or shamans named Bloody Barnabas. I've heard this name before, and I believe this chieftain is responsible for other recent attacks on our men and supply trains. This attack was much larger in scope, however, and Bloody Barnabas apparently led 50 or more gatormen supported by grape swamp priests. The gatormen came out of the water on the edge of the lake, ambushing the column. They attacked the warjacks first, neutralizing them in the first few minutes of combat. After that, it was a slaughter, and Lieutenant Umber was unable to provide any details at all, his terror nearly overcoming him. The last thing he said was that Bloody Barnabas caused the, quote, swamp to rise up, unquote, after the battle and covered the road. As ridiculous as this sounds, the road is gone and the swamp now extends nearly a mile further from the edge of the lake. Of course, this simply could be the natural ebb and flow of the blind water, but in my 5 years at Northgard, I've never seen anything like it. We could attempt to hunt down and eradicate these gatormen, but I fear the cost in men and resources would be very high. It is my recommendation that we abandon this particular route altogether and reroute our supply trains further west through the Deepwater Tower. Captain Tarlin Dunford.
You have no doubt seen a trend in the types of documents in this dossier. There are all accounts of Barnabas's activities from sources far removed from gatorman society. How then is this great and powerful shaman viewed by members of his own race? There is one individual who can provide this type of perspective, but dealing with him is nearly as dangerous as seeking an audience with Barnabas himself. I was able to track down the notorious gatorman witch doctor who calls himself Wrong Eye and convinced him to speak with me, but only after plying him with many gifts, including 4 bottles of the strongest Ruick brandy I could find. I was forced to work with an interpreter since Wrong Eye does not speak any human tongue, although he apparently understands quite a few. I have attempted to make sense of the gatorman witch doctor's ramblings, which I have transcribed in full during our interview. I have spared you the entirety of this bizarre conversation and related here only Wrong Eye's answers to the very direct questions about Barnabas. When I could keep him on track, that is. Wrong Eye is surprisingly forthcoming with information. Does Barnabas wish to unite all gatormen under his control?
Unite? That is a human word. Barnabas is Hokshisan, great one, and we all bow to him or die. Simple. He give each tribe a third choice. Most make that choice that lets them live.
How many tribes does Barnabas command?
Blindwater and Bloodsmith are his. Through Caliban, much of the Great Marsh to the south.
Caliban?
The Grave Walker. A mighty bokur and trusted advisor to the Hokshisan. That one is wily and dangerous.
What about you? Do you bow to Barnabas?
Snapjaw and I bow to no one. But I do as Barnabas asks, when it suits me.
What of the other races of the swamp? The bog trogs, the swamp gobbers?
Awful, barely worth eating. But the Hokshisan has some use for these creatures. The trogs serve him or face death. Barnabas has yoked the greatest among them to his will.
Does Barnabas wish to conquer those outside the swamps? Humans, perhaps?
Conquest is only part of his desires. Veneration, worship, legend. For these he truly hungers.
I don't understand. He wants gatormen to worship him like a god.
Many already worship him, but much more is needed for the Hokshisan to achieve that which he truly desires.
What is needed? What is it that he desires?
Blood is needed, death, and the power that lives within it. That is all I will say, unless you have more of the burning water.
I did not, unfortunately, have another bottle of Ruick brandy with me, and the interview ended. I'll admit to being quite relieved to leave Wrong Eye's presence. His giant pet gator Snapjaw had been lurking nearby while I spoke to the witch doctor, moving almost imperceptibly closer to the interpreter myself every few minutes. I have never felt so low upon the food chain in all of my life. Despite the dangers in speaking with Wrong Eye, he did provide some intriguing bits of information. That Barnabas has largely subjugated the tribes of the Bloodsmith and the Fen Marshes is startling, as is the control he's established over the Bartrox. However, the most intriguing bit, I think, however, is the last part about blood and death. Cryptic, to be sure, but I feel these words may point to the heart of Barnabas's true goals. I do have one final document, which I believe dovetails nicely with Wrong Eye's interview. All accounts point to the fact that Barnabas is a mighty shaman, and his command over the swamp and the fell spirits within it are great. However, this power seems to be enhanced by another of this tradition, Caliban. It is unclear why Caliban serves Barnabas, but he seems central to the greater shaman's goals. The account of the survivor from the river steamer ambushed and massacred by gatormen on the banks of the Black River is, I believe, vitally important to understanding what Barnabas is trying to do. He and Caliban are both present during this attack, and it is clear that the murder of dozens of passengers served a much more heinous purpose than simple slaughter. You will, of course, note that many similarities between the attack on the river steamer Alton Arir and the attack on the Signarin supply train near Northgard some 70 years earlier.
Commander Talbot, my men and I have investigated the vicious attack on the Alton Alir, and it pains me to report that we found only a single survivor. The remains of the other passengers were found in abundance. Most were dismembered, or even skeletonized, and were beyond identification. There is no doubt to me that gatormen were responsible for this terrible attack, as we also found many of their bodies amongst the slain passengers of that steamboat. The survivor we found, a mercenary named Damien Vard, hired to protect the Altanir's wealthier passengers, had escaped death by hiding beneath the corpses of his fallen comrades. From the opposite shore, he witnessed the gatormen feasting upon the passengers and something else. Now, Vard is a hardened mercenary and no stranger to violent death, but what he witnessed had him so terrified I could scarcely get a word out of him edgewise. We'd managed to calm him down enough to question him, and I'll quickly summarize the bizarre story he related. After the attack on the Alton Alir, the gatormen gathered what remained of the passengers, heaped them onto the shore, and began some kind of ritual. There were many shamans chanting, along with two impressive-looking gatormen that appeared to be spiritual leaders of some type. One wore an ornate wooden mask, and the other covered his head in a leather-bound shroud. The ritual went on for some time, but was interrupted by the arrival of a large force of Pharaoh. This area is thick with pigmen, and they likely saw the presence of the gatormen as an intrusion upon their territory. A fierce battle ensued, and the gatormen warriors attempted to keep the Pharaoh at bay while their shamans completed the ritual. This is where Vard's account gets a little strange. He says the gatormen finished their ritual and summoned a vast spirit made of blood and bones that fell upon the Pharaoh and devoured them whole. This was the last I could get out of him, as he refused to speak further on the matter. As fantastic as this tale sounds, I don't think Vard was lying to me. He was legitimately terrified. Still, there is more to this story than what he has told us, I'm sure of it. I'm taking Vard back to Fort Falk for further questioning. Captain Ian Kentwood.
The magic used by gatormen is not something I am familiar with, but I do have access to those who are familiar with it. After describing the above events to my sources, the overwhelming conclusion was that Barnabas and Caliban had summoned an ancient and incredibly powerful spirit, something far more terrible than perhaps either could command alone. It calls to mind what Wrong Eye had said about Barnabas, that he needs, quote, death and the power that lives within it, unquote. I believe the murder of the Altanaria's passengers provided the necessary energy to summon this entity. Of course, this begs the questions. What else might Barnabas do with this death energy, especially if he had access to quite a bit more of it? It certainly adds some level of credibility to the more outlandish goals attributed to Barnabas, primarily his aspirations towards divinity. If the deaths of the 36 passengers aboard the Alton Ariers were enough to summon an ancient and powerful spirit, what might Barnabas and Caliban accomplish with the deaths of hundreds or thousands? A sobering thought, no? So we return to the question I posed earlier. Are the legends and myths surrounding Barnabas based in fact? I would tentatively say yes. Whether the ancient exploits of Barnabas are truly attributed to him, or he has simply adopted the name and deeds of some long-dead forebear matters little. The gatormen he commands believe in this legend. Finally, is Barnabas a credible threat to the Iron Kingdoms? I would answer this with a resounding yes. Although primitive, gatormen are powerful warriors, and their shamans command magic on par with any human arcanist or warcaster. Barnabas may command thousands of gatormen and bog trogs. Such a force could be unleashed upon the civilized nations of Western Immoren to devastating effect. And while a rampaging army of gatormen is certainly cause for concern, I think the information contained in this dossier indicates that Bloody Barnabas is after something far more terrible than simple conquest. Something that will require blood and death on a scale I scarcely want to imagine. Greetings, dear viewer. This is Gavyn Kyle. If you've liked this dossier on this particular subject and wish to see more from my classified files, then it would be in your best interest to like, comment, and most of all, subscribing to this channel. If you fail to do so, then the rest of my files shall remain under lock and key where no mortal eyes will see them. If you wish to support this channel in a more direct fashion, there is Patreon in the description, as well as PayPal. You can also support the channel by purchasing the author's new book, New World, on sale on Amazon. Link is in the description below. Until next time, this has been Gavyn Kyle. Thank you for enjoying my files, and until the next time.